Hey everybody, my name's Christiane. I'm the Education Coordinator with Whitefish Legacy Partners, and today I am out on my skis exploring winter on the Whitefish Trail. I want to know from you, what is it that you love most about being on the trails in wintertime? Maybe it's the beauty of the snow, maybe it's that you get to be on your skis or your snowshoes, maybe it's the quiet and solitude. I know for me, I love getting out away from everybody out on the trail just for some peace, quiet, and solitude. But one of my ultimate favorite things about the Whitefish Trail in winter and why there's always this huge smile on my face is because when I'm out on trail, I realize just how not alone I am. There are so many creatures that move along this trail through this forest, and the snow gives them away. So today I brought you with me because we are going to learn the basics of finding and discovering the animal tracks and some of the most common animal tracks that we'll find. So the other day I was out on the Whitefish Trail, it was dusk, it was quiet, and I noticed these little tracks veering off to the right of the trail into the woods. And so I stopped and I got closer and I realized right away, this is definitely a wild animal, not a dog. And then I started to narrow it down and I got closer and I started to think, this might be from a wild feline, a cat. And I'm going to tell you how I knew that. And then I followed the tracks back onto the ski trail, and I realized the tracks had been following the classic Nordic track along the groomed run. Now the snow was freshly falling, and these tracks had not been filled in at all, and I could make out the toes, the size, the shape, and everything I needed to know to narrow it down to a bobcat. And I was so excited, and I realized this cat might have just darted off the trail when it heard me coming. So we were that close to interacting. And I don't know why that makes me so excited, but it does. So I'm going to show you all the ways to start narrowing it down to which animal it might be, and maybe you can go out and discover who's been on the trail before you. So let's go explore. So let's talk about that bobcat track I saw. How did I figure it out, who I think it was? Well, the first thing I noticed that set me off to know it was a wild animal on the trail was noticing this distinct pattern. So animals move in distinct patterns. And so I noticed it was very organized and deliberate steps. So snow falls from the trees all the time. People's dogs run around on trails. So it can be hard to figure out what you're looking at. But we're gonna figure out the four main patterns of tracks. And once you can recognize a pattern, you know right away an animal was there moving through. Now, another thing to look for when you do find a track, you notice the pattern, and then you get closer, and you'll start to make out the size and the general shape. Is it round? Is it ovular? And then what you can start to notice, can you make out any of the toes? You can count toes to start to narrow it down to different animal families or species. Can you notice claws or webbing? And then once you look at those things, you can also start to think about two things to imagine the size of an animal. And it's similar to people. So the bigger the animal, the bigger the track is going to be. And the bigger the animal, the bigger the stride is going to be. So the spacing between the steps, and the straddle, which is going to be the space between the sides of the body. So right versus left, how far apart are they? So you can imagine, okay, this animal was probably pretty small. The tracks are small, the stride is small. And then you can take a picture and always use something for scale and take it home if you don't know right away or you don't have your tracking book, and start to notice what size animal it could be and start to narrow it down. Now let's look at the four main ways, the four main patterns that animals use when they're walking through the forest and through the snow. Let's get a closer look at these four main patterns that animals will leave behind in the snow. Now, the way that they move through the snow is going to be determined by their body shape, its form and function, and also basically the best way to save and conserve energy as they move through the snow. So the first one we're going to look at is known as the Zigzaggers, or perfect walkers, who have sort of a diagonal track. Right foot and left foot land at different places, and the back foot lands right where the front foot landed, so they only have to break trail once. So you can think of who might move through the forest as a perfect walker. The next one we'll look at is known as a hopper. Hoppers usually have bigger, strong back legs for hopping and bigger back feet. And you can see in this track, this would be an example of what a pattern of a deer mouse would look like. The big back feet and small front feet. Now the front feet land first, but the back feet sort of come around and land in front of the front feet. So this mouse would be headed this way if it was scampering across the snow. And deer mice are cool because they leave a little line. Can you imagine what that's from? It's from their tail. So those are hoppers. And we'll also look at bounders. Bounders have long bodies, and their front feet land and take off, and their back feet land right pretty much where the front feet just were. So you'll see a 2x2 track. Hoppers are going to be in a pattern of 4, bounders in a pattern of 2x2. And then finally we have waddlers. And waddlers just sort of lumber through the forest. They're usually going to have big, heavier bodies, and just sort of drag their feet. Their feet don't land where the other landed, and their right side moves and then their left side. So who would be waddling through the forest? Let's take a closer look and find out who leaves these patterns in the snow. Well, let's start with the perfect walkers, the zigzaggers, those diagonal tracks left in the snow. Can you think of who might walk that way? We're going to talk about 3 main families. If you guessed any animals from the deer family, you're right, or the canine family, or the feline family. So let's start with the deer family. We have 4 animals that frequent the Whitefish Trails that are all in the deer family. If you guessed deer, you're right. We have 2 species of deer. We have white-tailed deer and mule deer. Now, the 2 species are very distinct in the way they look when you see them, but their tracks are very, very similar. Hard to tell apart. So in general, they're going to be about 2.5 inches long, and they are hooved animals. So the deer family have what we call hooves, cloved into 2 toes. Deer has a real pointed tip, and they leave this heart shape in the snow. In the deer family, they all have sort of heftier front bodies, and you can imagine the males have antlers, elk, moose,